A 66-foot tall sculpture of a nude woman has been standing in the harbor of Ilfracombe, Devon, in the UK since October 2012. It's on loan from the artist Damien Hirst until 2032. Hirst is a blue chip artist, one who sells work for millions of dollars, and his website is currently down. Using the Wayback Machine, I was able to find this quote describing the work on Hirst's previous website. Verity is an allegory for truth and justice. Her stance is taken from Edgar Degas' Little Dancer of 14 Years. An anatomical cross-section of her head and torso reveal her skull and the developing fetus inside her womb. Verity stands on a base of scattered legal books and holds the traditional symbols of justice, a sword and scales. Representing truth, her scales are hidden, off balance behind her back, whilst her sword is held confidently in her upstretched arm. I would add a few more details, specifically that the figure is facing east, and that its style is anatomically correct insofar as a 66-foot tall sculpture can be. Also, I'll emphasize that the artist himself has called the piece an allegory for truth and justice. This year will be 10 years since the sculpture was erected. It's produced commerce and controversy. As with most public art, very little attention has been given to this artwork beyond the initial controversies surrounding its erection. Here's a small sampling of public comments and reporting regarding the artwork. John Jones on the artist in The Guardian. Once Hirst had real wit, imagination, and originality, but that has been eclipsed by his incredible financial career, which has turned him into something genuinely dangerous. Britain has writers and scientists of world standing, but art has become our contemporary cultural signature, and Hirst our most renowned creative figure. As such, he sends out a very clear message that art is about making money from nothing. Devon has its own paper, devonlive.com. Here are some comments they gathered in 2012. I'm totally against it. I don't like it. I don't think it's going to benefit the people of Ilfracombe. I think it's ugly. Another said, it's totally degrading towards women. Art critic David Lee similarly was not a fan, so much so that he went on Sky News in 2012 to say, it's a monument to his ego. It's all about money and celebrity with absolutely nothing to do with art. But that's Damien Hirst for you. You expect that with him. The sculpture as a sculpture has no merit at all. It's a figure of justice, its title is truth, and if there were really any justice or truth in the contemporary art world, then Hirst would have been exposed as a laughable charlatan ages ago. At least Mr. Lee attempted to interpret the allegory, unlike most. Most recently, I found from Jonathan McAloon at elephant.art on January 6, 2019, meant to stand for rebirth and regeneration, which it certainly did for a time, it now could equally be seen as the false promise of gentrification. Standing as it does, looking out to sea with its sword up high, it could soon also symbolize the ugly insularity of Britain in a post-Brexit future, shafted by its own optimism. Damien Hirst has always liked his symbolism and allegory on a massive, almost impersonal scale. His best and worst work beg to be loaded with meaning. You can make them stand for whatever you like, as long as the themes are broad and unsubtle. Verity takes this to its furthest extreme. Few of these critics have even attempted to take this artist at his word and attempted to interpret the allegory. Their criticism is most often not of the work, but of the artist and his antics. Why? Damien Hirst is a polarizing figure in the art world. He's a businessman, a marketer, a joker, and perhaps an artist. His bombastic artwork often requires more capital to produce than any other artworks in existence, and his main tactic is that of the spectacle. Hirst once described in an interview with Gordon Byrne, it's like if a tree falls down on your land or in your street, it looks bigger. You drive to work every day, everything's the same, you know where you are, then one day you drive to work, and a tree's fallen down, and you go, fucking hell. You look at the tree, and it's massive. You never notice it until it falls down. Artists do that. From a Guardian interview with John Jones on February 8, 2021, he said, I much prefer it when you've got this neglected thing like a sheep, which is meat. You're thinking, why am I feeling empathy? That's a great thing because you should, because it's not just meat. That image of the neglected carcass of a sheep recalls his 1994 work, Away from the Flock, a sheep in a vitrine with roots deep in Christian imagery. Catholicism, he confesses, pervades how he sees things. The antics of this artist raise the question, can and should this artist be taken seriously? I must confess I never took him seriously until Mike Rippey asked me to discuss a recent exhibition of his work during a Scapegoat podcast. I found the conversation enlightening, but I was still not that interested in Hirst. Then Mike asked me to examine this piece from a pro-life perspective. I was reluctant not because I was not interested in Hirst, but I too believe his work was trite. And I'm not a fan of projecting ideologies onto artwork. For Mike's sake, I would offer up my humble interpretation of this artwork, but I would not be excited about it. In order to do as little work as possible, I started with what I knew about the artwork and the artist. I knew Hirst was interested in reality. I know he often used heavy-handed symbolism and imagery. I could see that the sculpture is a young girl who is revealed without room for doubt that she is to be a mother. She is holding up the sword of justice in a triumphant manner. I decided I could read this sculpture as the future is female, but with a claim on motherhood as part of a future is female. An emphasis on fairness and motherly protection. The artwork could be interpreted as a call for a reformation of Western justice systems to embrace the qualities of a nurturing and protective mother in order to foster a culture of life. That sounded nice, and honestly, I'm still partially satisfied with that interpretation. I left it at that for months, but it was not sitting right with me. I was not giving the devil his due, and I knew that I was not giving this sculpture its due. While I was satisfied in part, I was confronted by my own ignorance while watching a movie of all things. I would like to interject a note before I continue regarding my methods and philosophy of interpreting artworks. The artist is not the authority on what an artwork means. Artists often make without knowing what they are making, and they certainly cannot predict every interpretation the public will see in their work. Artworks are filled with meaning by their audience, and those interpretations can change over time. On top of that, an artwork can be interpreted differently by each audience member because of their personal histories and how vague or abstract a work might be. But Damien Hirst himself claims this artwork is an allegory. Allegories mean specific things, and not all artworks are allegories. When Orwell wrote Animal Farm, he had a specific interpretation in mind, otherwise the allegory would not work. It would be a strange story of intelligent but corrupt farm animals. I must ask, what is the meaning of this allegory? Is the artist lying? Is the cloak of allegory being laid over this statue in order to make a relatively uninteresting sculpture seem more meaningful than it really is? In order to address these questions, let me turn to the 3 art historical references that I have found as I dove deeper into the waters surrounding this sculpture. The first is Old Bailey in London. The second, mentioned by the artist himself, is the Degas sculpture. The third is a genre of art referred to as grotesques. What movie was it that allowed me to see my ignorance? V for Vendetta. As we are introduced to the anti-authoritarian terrorist V, he performs a demolition of the Old Bailey. That is the first public court in London. Right before he demolishes the court, the film displays the inscription that was written above the door of the main entrance, which reads, "Defend the children of the poor and punish the wrongdoer." The overt reference to defending children caught me off guard. The need for a public justice system, not beholden to a monarch, had never quite dawned on me before. It was not children of the rich, the royal, or the noble that needed justice. It was the children of the poor. Specifically, they needed a justice who is not blind, who stands in the shape of a cross, who carries impartial scales, and holds a double-edged English longsword to punish wrongdoers. The second historical reference is Degas' Little Dancer. Being well studied in art history, I knew that Degas was a womanizing man who objectified young girls, much like the clients who solicited the Parisian ballet dancers as prostitutes. Why else would a man of his age hang around the young girls' dressing rooms and bathrooms? Then, as I was walking through the library at Hope College, I saw a book with an elegant pink lettering that said Degas on the spine. From there, I found out that the original statue was never cast in bronze, like the ones you see littered around the globe. The original was wax, much like delicate religious statues. The wax was more fleshly, and would not be protected compared to the durable bronze of the replicas I've seen. The dancer is in what is called the fourth position, which is a position of rest. Ignorance confronted me once more as I found the illumined views of historians Norma Broad and Anna Margolis. Broad argued in 1977 that Degas was not a misogynist, but was heartbroken by the way the girls of the Opera de Paris were treated. He hence could not portray the ballerina in a stereotypical manner, but rather showed her as she was, fragile, semi-translucent, and conforming to the will of a predator. Margolis writes, "The prostitution of ballerinas from the backstage at the Opera de Paris marked the end of the Romantic ballet era, and the period of decline that followed. Little Dancer, aged 14, is therefore a symptom of its time, in which budding ballerinas entered an environment of deprivation and were expected to use their bodies for the delight of rich Parisian men, both on stage and in bed." Margolis goes so far to respond to a sonnet that Degas wrote about the waxwork by saying that Degas felt this new being was therefore clearly a degenerate girl, destined to damnation and prostitution. Some historians believe it was possible that Degas died a virgin and was actually trying to shine a light on the lies of the Opera de Paris, which promised to lift poor girls up socially and economically via their studies and skills in elegance. In reality, it preyed upon them just as we have recently seen Hollywood prey upon women to this day. Finally, there is the grotesque genre of art, which is an inverse of the beloved and famed Cabinet of Curiosities. Within this genre, we find the sideshow horrors of birth defects, two-headed sheep, and organs submerged in formaldehyde. Hirst is the most famous contemporary star of this genre today, where he confronts viewers with the disgusting biological truth of reality, like a fallen tree that demands you notice its size. So what do all these references add up to? What kind of allegory do they display? The poor 14-year-old victim of sexual abuse has grown up. She now faces the natural consequences of her abuse, pregnancy. She stands atop the law and has seemingly flayed her own skin to reveal the absolute reality of the evil she has suffered. Behind her back, the scales are tipped. In her left hand, she raises an English longsword. She's not blind, but her skinned eye is half closed, and her skinless eye is bared and open. She's at rest. Her child is flipped upside down, primed for birth. What action will she take next as she looks east? Well, actually, she doesn't look east. I lied earlier. She is looking in an easterly direction, as can be observed in this screen capture from Google Earth. When looking at satellite images, I noticed that she doesn't look east, and she doesn't line up with the pier that juts out in front of her either. I couldn't help but wonder, where is she looking? One of Google Earth's features is the ability to draw lines between landmarks. On a hunch, I decided to draw a line from Verity to Justice atop Old Bailey. And it appears to me that Verity faces the Old Bailey. The victim of abuse looks to Justice, who has given up her punishing sword and her scales. Now, from the foundation of scattered law books, she has a choice. Will the children of the poor be defended? True justice, God's justice, cannot be blind. Perhaps we should prefer that human justice is blind. But the truth of Verity is that a victim of abuse hides tipped scales behind her back while wielding power to punish, and the only possible victim is the baby she's about to birth. I believe Hirst knew exactly what he was doing, but that no one has taken him at his word because he comes off like a fool. On November 2nd, 2012, Hirst's website noted in a blog post, "Without the perfect equilibrium enacted by the scales, the sword becomes a dangerous instrument of power rather than justice. The scales are tipped in the hands of the victim, who stands atop the law and wields power, not justice. The victim becomes the victimizer."